Since the early 1980s, hundreds of tiles have been found embedded in the asphalt of major American cities: Philadelphia, New York, Washington, D.C., Boston, Kansas City, Chicago, and further, Buenos Aires, Santiago de Chile, and one in Tokyo's Shibuya crossing. The tiles are roughly the size of a license plate. They're made of linoleum and asphalt compound, and they all contain some version of the same message. Toynbee idea in movie. 2001 Resurrect dead on planet Jupiter. Nobody put them there officially. Nobody claimed them. For 20 years, nobody knew how they were made or how they were installed in streets that carry thousands of cars a day, without anyone ever seeing it happen. In 1985, someone interrupted Philadelphia's 11 p.m. news broadcast to send the same message on television. Nobody was ever identified. In 2011, a documentary team spent 6 years investigating the tiles and converged on a reclusive Philadelphia man named Severino Verna, a man whose childhood obsession was cementing dead pigeons and whose family ran a funeral home. They sent him the documentary. He never responded. The tiles are still there. New ones are still appearing. And the message, Resurrect dead on planet Jupiter, has been embedded in the streets of a continent by a man who never explained why, and who may still be watching to see if anyone understood. The first thing to understand about the Toynbee tiles is the message itself. Toynbee idea in movie. 2001 Resurrect dead on planet Jupiter. 3 references compressed into a license plate-sized rectangle of linoleum and asphalt. Arnold Toynbee, a 20th century British historian and philosopher whose major work, A Study of History, proposed a cyclical theory of civilization, in which societies rise, decline, and are replaced. Toynbee was also interested in questions of death, immortality, and the possibility that human consciousness might persist beyond biological death. In his later writings, he speculated about the nature of the afterlife in ways that were unusual for a mainstream academic historian. Stanley Kubrick's 1968 film 2001, A Space Odyssey, in which an astronaut travels beyond Jupiter and is reborn as a transformed being. The film's ending, deliberately ambiguous, has been interpreted as depicting transcendence, transformation, and rebirth. The connection to Jupiter is explicit, and the proposition resurrect dead on planet Jupiter, not as metaphor, not as artistic provocation, as a literal program, the idea that the dead of Earth should be, and could be, transported to Jupiter and brought back to life. The tiles are not expressing a poetic wish, they are asserting a plan. This is important to understand before you can understand the person who made them. The message is not surrealist art, it is not random provocation. It is the compressed core of a belief system that Severino Verna spent the better part of his adult life attempting to communicate to a world that was not listening. The question worth asking is not what the message means. The question worth asking is why someone spent 40 years embedding it in asphalt. The first tiles appeared in Philadelphia in the early 1980s. Pedestrians noticed them embedded in the asphalt at busy intersections, at crosswalks, in traffic lanes, in the kind of places where thousands of feet and wheels pass daily. They were colourful, carefully lettered, and clearly deliberate. They looked like they had always been there. For 20 years, nobody understood how they were made or installed. The installation method, when it was finally pieced together, was elegant in its simplicity. Verna, investigators believe, prepared his tiles in advance from layers of linoleum, the material used for floor covering. He inscribed the message into the linoleum surface and coated the tile with a mixture of tar paper and asphalt crack-filling compound that would bond with the existing road surface. He then placed the tiles at intersections, probably from a vehicle, protected by the car from observation, sliding the prepared tile under the door in traffic conditions that would press it into the warm asphalt and begin the bonding process. No tools required at the site, no visible activity. A car stopped at an intersection, and then the car moved on. The tiles bonded to the road surface and became indistinguishable from it. Rain and traffic compressed them further. Within weeks, a tile placed in this way would be essentially permanent, removable only by deliberately cutting it out of the asphalt. The simplicity of the method explains something important: how one person, working alone, could install hundreds of tiles across dozens of cities over 2 decades without anyone ever witnessing it. He didn't need to be invisible. He just needed a car and a red light. On March 8, 1983, a letter arrived at the Philadelphia Inquirer. It was signed James Marasco, a name that investigators later established was one of the aliases Verna used when he attempted to communicate through conventional channels. The letter described a theory about the resurrection of the dead, referenced Arnold Toynbee and Stanley Kubrick, and proposed what the writer called the Minority Association, an organization dedicated to advancing the project of Jovian resurrection. The Inquirer did not publish the letter. There is no evidence that anyone at the paper responded to it. That winter, the concentration of tiles in Philadelphia increased. In 1985, a second attempt at conventional communication was made and failed more visibly. Someone interrupted Philadelphia's Channel 3 evening news broadcast at approximately 11 p.m. The interruption lasted long enough to transmit a message about the Toynbee idea before normal programming resumed. The broadcast was traced to an unauthorized transmitter signal but was never attributed to an identified individual. Nobody was charged. Nobody was found. The incident is notable for 2 reasons. First, it predates by 2 years the 1987 Max Headroom broadcast interruption in Chicago, a more famous and more widely covered television hack that shares certain characteristics with the Philadelphia event. Second, the message transmitted was consistent with the Toynbee tile content, suggesting the same person or the same network was attempting to reach a mass audience through any available channel. The newspaper had ignored the letter. The television broadcast had been cut short and untraceable. The streets of Philadelphia, however, were accumulating a record that no editor could reject and no engineer could interrupt. The tiles appeared in Philadelphia first and most densely, but they spread. Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Boston, Washington, D.C., New York City, where they appeared at some of the most heavily trafficked intersections in Manhattan, Kansas City, Chicago, and then, somehow, South America, Buenos Aires, Santiago de Chile, where one tile carried, in addition to the standard message, a Philadelphia street address, 2624 South 7th Street, an address on a tile in Santiago. When investigators first located that address in 2006, the current occupants had no knowledge of the tiles and were reportedly frustrated by the people who came to ask. But in 2011, The documentary team investigating the tiles established that the previous long-term resident of that address was Severino Verna. He had left his address in a tile in a South American city, not by accident, not carelessly. As part of a tile that was otherwise consistent with the others, carefully lettered, deliberately placed, containing the standard Toynbee message alongside the address of the man who made it. Verna knew someone would eventually find it. He wanted to be found. What he did not want, or could not bring himself to do, was to be the one who made the first move. In 2011, a Philadelphia filmmaker named Justin Dewar released a documentary about the tiles, Resurrect Dead, The Mystery of the Toynbee. Tiles had been 6 years in the making. Dewar and his collaborators, Colin Smith and Steve Wynick, had worked from neighborhood recollections, property records, tile concentrations, and a 1983 newspaper article to converge on Verna as the probable tile maker. The film was accepted to the Sundance Film Festival, where it won the Directing Award in the U.S. documentary category. It was the kind of institutional recognition that the Philadelphia Inquirer had refused to provide in 1983. The documentary team sent Verna a copy of the finished film. He received it. He never responded. Smith later described having seen Verna in Philadelphia, having been close enough to speak to him, and having chosen not to approach him. The team had reached a conclusion. They could document the tiles, they could identify the probable maker, but they could not make him explain himself if he chose not to. The tiles were his statement. The silence was his too. After the documentary's release, new tiles began appearing in Philadelphia and New York, larger tiles with red italic text. Tiles with more elaborate messages, some referencing the media, some attacking journalists specifically, some extending the Toynbee resurrection argument in new directions. Whether these were Verna's work or the work of followers inspired by the documentary has never been definitively established. The House of Hades tiles, a specific style associated with a group believed to be based in Buffalo, New York, represent one strand of continuation. A tile in Tokyo's Shibuya crossing represents another. Whether these represent continuation, homage, or something more organized is not known. We want to return to the address on the Santiago tile. 2624 South 7th Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Verna's home for most of the period during which the tiles were being installed. An address placed in a tile in Santiago, Chile, thousands of miles from where Verna lived, in a country he had no documented connection to. We spent time looking at the tiles that carry additional information beyond the standard Toynbee message. The tiles that reference the press, the government, specific enemies. The tiles that attack journalists, some of which say explicitly, "Murder every journalist, I beg of you." The tiles that describe what Verna called the media machine, the conspiracy of editors and publishers who had suppressed the Toynbee idea. And we found a pattern. The tiles that carry addresses, there are several, not just the Santiago one, are clustered in specific years. They appeared in clusters around 1983, around 1990, and around 1997. 3 periods when, we believe, Verna made attempts to invite contact, and then, when contact didn't come, retreated back into the tiles. We are not saying Verna was waiting for someone to come to the address and agree with him. We are saying He was waiting for someone to come to the address and understand what he was trying to say. There is a difference. The documentary team came close. They identified him. They sent him the film. He received it and said nothing. Maybe the film understood the tiles. Maybe it didn't quite understand what the tiles were for. Here is what we know. Since the late 1970s, a reclusive South Philadelphia man named Severino Verna embedded hundreds of tiles in the streets of American and South American cities. The tiles carry a message about the resurrection of the dead on Jupiter. Verna attempted to communicate through newspapers and television. He was ignored and untraceable. He left his home address in a tile in Santiago. A documentary identified him in 2011 and sent him the film. He never responded. New tiles are still appearing. The message is still in the streets of dozens of cities. Here is what we don't know. Why Jupiter specifically? What Verna believed would happen when the world understood. Whether the address tiles were invitations or something else. Who is making the new tiles? Whether Verna knows about the Tokyo tile, and whether the man who spent 40 years trying to be heard ever felt, even briefly, that he had been. We're laying out what we found. You decide what it means. If you know something we don't, you know where to find us. Subscribe, share this, and leave a comment, because somewhere in Philadelphia, the streets still carry his message. And somewhere, possibly, the man who put it there is still watching the pavement, waiting to see if anyone looked down.